Good morning. 902 here. You got to tune to KMUD Garberville, 91.1 FM in HD1, KMUE Eureka, 88.1 FM in HD1, KLAI Laytonville, 90.3 FM. On the web at kmud.org and at FM Translator K258BQ Shelter Cove 99.5. I'm Javi. We're doing Cheat Talks this morning. I have my guests ready. John Ford, author of Peace at Work. We're going to be talking about polarization. We're going to be talking about divisiveness, division, and remedies to mitigate conflict. Remember, the views and opinions expressed throughout the broadcast today are those of the station. Or they're not those of the station. They're those of the speakers, not the station staff or underwriters. Time will be made available for other viewpoints. Thanks for joining us. Well, welcome to Chi Talks, where it's all about the energy. And if everything is made of energy, then we have a lot to discuss. So let's get started. Current events in the world at large are enough to make one lose faith in humanity. School shootings, illness, disease, political strife, and more have created polarization, division, and conflict. Perhaps mental, emotional, and cognitive well-being serve as conditional environmental factors which may point to even predict events perceived as violence, distress, and disarray. When we use the Qigong lens and hold a space for pain messages to come into awareness from the body, we find opportunity to make friends with pain and often reestablish relationships that have, for some reason, been severed. How can we do this on the social landscape? Can we make friends with enemies? I have two guests lined up today. My first guest here is John Ford. He's an experienced workplace mediator and soft skills trainer based in California who has successfully mediated hundreds of workplace disputes since 1996. He's the author of Peace at Work and the creator of the Empathy Set, Feelings and Needs Cards for Emotional Intelligence and Empathy. In addition, John has provided soft skills training to thousands of employees at all levels in the workplace across a wide range of industries, including health and elder care. He teaches negotiation at UC Hastings School of Law and taught mediation to graduate business and psychology students at Golden State University from 2010 to 2016. He is a past president of the Association for Dispute Resolution of Northern California and the managing editor of Mediate.com from 2000 to 2010. If you want to hop online, you can go to peaceatwork.info or the empathyset.com to see a little bit of his work. I'm going to go ahead and bring him in and welcome John to the show. Do I have you? Are you with me?
Thanks, Javi. I'm here.
Thanks for joining us. Good to have you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey. And Marilyn thought it was important to note the journey from lawyer to mediator.
Sure. Well, let's see, I was born in South Africa, and I think as everyone knows, certainly at the time that I was born, South Africa was at war with itself. There was apartheid. And in the bubble of my family, we were avoidant. And so I didn't really see much displays of conflict. Sometimes hard figuring out how we make our life choices. But the first way, I suppose, I engaged with conflict in a more conscious way was through the study of law and also through my conscience being pricked and being aware of the injustices that surrounded me at the time. I was motivated to do human rights work, and I moved when I graduated from law school to Namibia. And what I found, though, was as I was practicing as an attorney, fighting the good fight, which I did identify with, I was happy to see Namibia transition from being occupied to being a free and independent country. But at a personal level, doing my work, I was always struck by the ineffectiveness of the adversarial approach and the sort of just the fighting mentality. And so both through divorce work and also through labor work, I sort of gravitated towards mediation. I hadn't been trained as a mediator, but it just sort of seemed to make more sense to me if I could get the participants to talk about their issues and work something out. I preferred doing that. So that really was, as I say, the big shift that occurred for me was from that adversarial mindset of how we approach the inevitable conflict that we all encounter in this realm of duality, if we want to put it like that. And that I made, as I say, I made a shift to being a more collaborative, unity kind of focused practitioner who was trying to bring peace into the room through mediation. And I still do that. I mean, I still work as a mediator and as trainer, as you're sharing a little bit about my bio. The only thing, and you also mentioned the empathy set, is that I've been focusing on simplifying and bringing the sort of the simple skills of conflict resolution to make them more widely available. So instead of having to go to see a mediator to help out with their conflict, people are empowered to productively address their conflict on their own.
Excellent. Well, the idea of the show today is regenerating the social landscape, and let's just dive right in and talk about the let's look at the context and where we're at. Let's look at polarization, division. Can we talk about that? How do you see those? What's your lens? And then how has your training and your learning helped to mitigate conflict?
Yeah, that's just one of those, what I call those interesting questions, interesting topics, right? Because it really a lot depends on our lens and our focus. In other words, what are our beliefs about life? And are we focusing into the world of 10,000 things, the myriad of representations of the oneness, or are we focusing on oneness? So in a funny way, I think a lot of the core reality of conflict is that we as humans socialize ourselves and program ourselves to focus on the 10,000 things. So the external world out there, and we forget that those 10,000 things are representing one thing, the energy of it all. And so when we become focused on externally in that way of the things out there, there's lots of opportunity in the duality, in the world for there to be conflict. And but there's also always, and that to me has been the more sort of the personal path around how I view conflict, there's always that opportunity of connecting with the oneness of it all. I know it's a popular image, but it really resonates with me. It's sort of the idea of the waves on the ocean, as opposed to, or the waves on the ocean thinking that they're each individuals and forgetting that they're all part of the ocean. And I think for the most part, that's the way we see humans in the world, is that they're all thinking like they're the individual waves and they have rights, and this wave that's coming in at them from another angle, it's like, hey, what are you doing? You can't mess with my wave experience. And we forget that after a short little period on this globe, we subside back into the ocean of oneness. So I think that, to me, that at a sort of at a fundamental level is that we've forgotten that we are one. We forgot that there is just this one sort of energy, and we're misguided to focus, as it were, externally. But to the extent, and certainly my career as a mediator has been focused not on having conversations with people like I'm expressing with you now, Javi. It's really resolving conflict in that more external realm, that the world of 10,000 things. And there are a lot of techniques that and approaches that we can use and bring to bear that help folks to, I suppose, to me, I think the opportunity really is to find balance in the extremities of the world. In other words, to practice, like you're talking about, the social landscape as opposed to the physical. So thinking of Tai Chi as a sort of a physical art form where you're trying to maintain balance. I think there are opportunities in the social realm as well, where we seek to maintain balance in our interactions with one another. And again, without always making those sort of things explicit, that certainly, to my mind, was what I was doing as a mediator. I was trying to bring balance, help people to see the opportunity for unity, even though they were more what I would call externally focused.
Cool. This is great. What I'm hearing is that the 10,000 things serve as the opportunity and point back to, I guess, truth and truth in nature, which is the oneness. And so for people that do not know, when we talk about 10,000 things, we're referring to the Tao Te Ching. And so the Tao Te Ching, famous texts utilized by Taoists and Chinese philosophy, written by Lao Tzu. The unnamed is hidden, a mystery, unknowable, oneness. The named are the 10,000 things that surround me. So the 10,000 things refer to the external world, whereas we also use that to honor the internal world, the yin side, if you will. So in our previous shows, we've talked about yin and yang. We've talked about, let's say, we've talked about Wu Ji, we've talked about Tai Chi, and we talked about Yin Yang, all in the same sort of context, whereas Wu Ji is that oneness. It's the plane of possibility. It is the infinite. It is source. It is the, what's the other word? Insubstantial, if you will. It's emptiness. What the state, the Qigong state points us to Wu Ji. It's what we're trying to find in relaxation when we do Qigong and Tai Chi. And Tai Chi is the energy by which yin yang are formed from Wu Ji. And Tai Chi is also the energy by which we return to Wu Ji from yin and yang. And the Chinese have for thousands of years distinguished what's called the yin side and the yang side, yin jian and yang jian, which points to the material dimension and the immaterial dimension. So we've also talked about the monks and in the monasteries had practices that cultivated both yin side, yang side, spiritual aspect alongside the material, physical skills and practices. And so I would say that there's an idea of what we call dual cultivation. And this principle of dual cultivation holds yin and yang in the same space. And maybe that can help to segue into the idea of dual cultivation in terms of partner aspect, excuse me, partner aspect and partner training, which you really get a sense of when you start to take the principles into partner practice, which I think is huge for martial arts practice, specifically Tai Chi practice. When you start to learn and practice energy exchange, then you have yourself and another person who stands next to you or in front of you, and then you become the myriad of things, which then points you back to this oneness, which in practice you're trying to find. What do you have to say about that, John?
Well, I was really enjoying listening to you, Javi. But I think you're right. In other words, I think that's the art of life, is how we dance together and move through those aspects of duality, of yin and yang, and not necessarily identify with them, even though there's temptations to, through our socialization sometimes, like say as men, to identify, well, we're yang and the women are yin in a simplistic way, but just to bring that awareness of those qualities of energy that are interacting with one another constantly and trying to seek that harmonious that balance, and as you say, to restore or return to the state of Wu Ji, that sort of that which precedes the first step as you move out into the world. And again, so for me and my, when I reflect on my world of work, and I say, well, I started out as an attorney. Well, there you could see the expression of yang energy and seeking to direct and to force and to want to, fight for justice in that kind of a way. And again, I think it's part of what's tricky about being in this world is on the one hand, there's this recognition, as you're saying, of that we are all from this one energy, the one source, and yet at the same time, what we also experience is this constant diversification, and so that there is this constant sort of beauty in the change and in all of the new forms that we see. And so in terms of as we're interacting in the world, as having to deal with that reality of duality, even as we remind ourselves that we are all one. And so when we look to that other person that stood on our toe and you say, oh, that hurt, you did that to me. At a certain level, that's true, and our senses reinforce that sense of separateness, and that's my toe and that was your foot. And at another level, there's also an opportunity to discover that we're all truly that we all are one. But I think that what you're pointing to also in terms of just that, pushing hands, in other words, that when we, through practices like Tai Chi, practice with one another and start exploring what that interaction looks like and how we're sensitive to the energy of others, our energy and their energy. And again, in that interaction, seeking that harmonious outcome, notwithstanding the duality. And my sense in terms of how we're living in the world is that we've, in terms of our predisposition has been towards more yang energy in terms of domination and control and power over the world, and we've neglected the yin dimensions, the more softer, sensitive, and I don't want to say weaker because they're really it's balanced. So it's not that the one is less important. And so for me in my world, for example, when I think of people in conflict, there's the need to express. So to me, that's the yang energy being expressed, where they're saying, I have these feelings, I have these needs. And then on the other side, the receiving person who's doing sort of the push hands, the social push hands, is saying, I hear you, I'm listening to you. And they're not, because the minute they're going into defensiveness, they're going into more of that yang kind of a posture. But anyway, I think that's part of the fascination of life, is seeing the energy at play. And as I say, both the temptation to move in that direction of we're all separate and identifying with the world of things and forgetting that we're all one. And also the dilemma that in other words, just as you were sort of saying to your audience, when we refer to the world of 10,000 things, giving the sort of the source context of where it comes from, as I've kind of discovered, we meet people where they are on the path of life. And so my concepts or my experience may not translate with someone else, in other words, to someone else's. So again, I think another important yin quality in terms of our interactions is how we are sensitive to the energy of others and meet people where they are, also respecting where our energy is, but also being sensitive and trying to connect with the energy of the other and move from there.
That's great. You talked about push hands. For people that don't know, push hands is it's a Tai Chi concept, but also a physical practice, a partner practice that reinforces the Tai Chi concepts. And it's also part of a curriculum. So a complete Tai Chi curriculum would consist of a lot of people see the Tai Chi form, the solo practice form, and that's what a lot of elders we find have benefited from in recent years. So we also have a meditation practice, which is part of Tai Chi curriculum. We have, because Tai Chi is rooted in martial arts, we have self-defense practices, and then there's also pushing hands practices. So I think that's it. Meditation, Tai Chi form, the applications of the form, and push hands. I might be forgetting something. So push hands is very important because it brings the yin and yang from internal, which is the solo form, to external, which is now interfacing with the external world. So that's what pushing hands is. Great practice, super deep. I really think that everybody should be exposed to it. And that's, I think, what Marilyn's trying to do with the pushing for peace practices. And then you also spoke about the exchange and you talked about, I think, what I heard you say was the reinforcement of listening and following. Whenever you're practicing Tai Chi with a partner, the fundamental movements and the fundamental energies are listen and follow, listen and follow. You're constantly listening and following while you're connected, which I think are huge, just foreign terms, I think, maybe to the Western mind, to the external mind in terms of our social landscape, business, capitalism, economics, and the predisposition, the tendency to be, as you said, yang. So when we're doing these Tai Chi practices, we're a lot of times focusing on yin, listening, following, connecting, listening, following, connecting, listening, following, connecting. And so you're training these energies. They're actually called like listening is called Ting Jing, listening energy. Well, following, listening, following, yielding, and redirecting. So these are all yin concepts, which I think point to the soft skills. Maybe you can expand a little bit on this concept, and maybe it's soft skills and how you use soft skills.
Well, as you're sharing that, Javi, what I was also reflecting on from my, my own sort of limited, as it were, practice of Tai Chi and push hands, is you're right that that we put a lot of emphasis on the practice as being a yin practice, and emphasizing that more sensitive, the receptivity and the following. But I also know from having pushed hands with a lot of people is that you often encounter a lot of yang. In other words, like where people are trying to like get to you or push you, and then you think like, so where's the receptivity? Where's the following there? In other words, and so I think what often does happen, even though the practice is seeking to guide us in that direction, we can't get beyond our programming and our desire, so as it were to express our aspect of the experience, or to sort of to fall into the frame of competition, and that somehow I'm competing with you and I wanting to win and get you to fall backwards, notwithstanding whatever other.
I hear you. I hear you on that. Yes. Yes.
So, so again, I think that's what you're getting at. So when we sort of, for example, when I'm exploring, say, the soft skills as a trainer, the soft skills are often, at least in the world of training, are considered to be the hard skills, because they're not the technical, they're more the interpersonal, how we get along. It's really just in a way what you're actually, it's the social reflection of what you're describing in push hands, where people are discovering the power and the utility of being receptive and open and softer in the world, and that to get places, even if we want to leave them with their ambitious goals to conquer the world as it were, that they need to show some softness. And I see this a lot in leaders that come in and have Daniel Goleman. I think a lot of folks have heard of him. He sort of brought emotional intelligence back on the map for us. Not that it was a new discovery, because it's been a topic amongst humans through the millennia, but he sort of repopularized it. But he would say in leadership there are 6 different leadership styles, and he'd say 4 of them produce positive effect. In other words, they're going to generate more harmonious outcomes, and 2 of them, as he would sort of say, you pay the piper. So the positive ones would be the leader who shares or engages people around a shared vision, or coaches the folks that they're working with in alignment with their career goals, that is more democratic, involves them in decisions that affect them, is more affiliative and sensitive to the feelings. He says a leader that engages with folks in that way, which is more the yin side of interaction, it's going to produce more harmony and alignment and feeling good and motivation and well-being. And then he also points out, though, he says, but there are 2 leadership styles that are necessary which would be the more like the yang ones, but you pay a price. And those would be the command and control and the pace setting. So, so the command and control is like, you do it my way because I told you to do it. Your job is to just follow the instructions. Don't question me. Just do what I say. And the pace setting is where you have something, like urgent that needs to be accomplished. So a lot of the times, and actually right now I'm working with a team where the leader has clearly embraced a sort of like as her dominant leadership sort of approach is a more command and control and pace setting. And so part of my job is to meet her where she is, because if I come in with judgment and say, so I have to step to her side, meet her where her is and help her see the consequence of her style of yang leadership, if we want to use that lens, and invite her to explore the benefits of the yin. But for her, that's scary because it means giving up control and doing things that aren't the same as being like, again, going back to the push hands where it's so clear, like, but I thought I was trying to push you off so you could lose balance. Isn't that what it's all about? So so I see that same, what you're sort of describing in that reflection of the push hands practice reflected in my engagement in my world, the social world, of how to shift a leader who, wants to be successful and isn't seeing how their socialization to sort of focus on a more yang approach is actually counterproductive and also, basically counterintuitive. So yeah, so I'd say a lot of my world is trying to sort of in a subtle way help people to make that shift and to see the value of more yin, more softness, more sensitivity, more awareness to the experience of others, and not so much about power over, my way, force, that kind of energy.
This is great. It's 9:30. You're listening to KMUD Garberville 91.1, KMUD Eureka 88.1, KLAI Laytonville 90.3. This is Chi Talks. I'm Javi. My guest is John Ford, author of Peace at Work, and he's a mediator and teacher, educator of soft skills, which is what we're talking about. And you talked about push hands. We're kind of skirting along this concept of pushing hands, which we know, which if you're just tuning in now, which is a practice of Tai Chi. And we're sharing our experience of pushing hands with other people. So imagine the the innate competitive aspect of human nature, and you're standing next to a person that you don't know, and you're going to practice this push hands skill. And typically, so what John was referring to is typically when you say you're going to push hands with someone, or someone wants to push hands with you, typically what it is meant as is kind of a challenge. And the challenge is who can push who off balance first, who can essentially destroy the posture and the root of the other person first, so as to push them off balance. This then communicates that if I can push you off balance, I can control your energy at will. If I can control your energy at will, I can overpower you, dominate, and maybe even kill. So when John refers to pushing hands, I refer to pushing hands as a skill of yin skills, and as a practice of yin skills in listening and following. So in training, it's a very yin training. However, if you meet someone who also practices push hands, they're likely going to want to see if they can off balance you, because they've spent so much time in training center, balance, focus, root, and these energies, and they want to test that. So essentially, like John says, it comes to a combative and competitive experience, which is not really fun. It's not really fun. So you really have to, I've learned, you have to distinguish, okay, are we competing or are we training? And in that way, both can kind of be on the same page. So this is what John's referring to. And he talked about leadership. So I really would like to expand on this idea of leadership, because you're talking about a yin leader and a yang leader. And so let's expand on that. I got to take a quick break. We got to do a little bit of a little bit of business here. So let's take a second here. And stay with me, John. Okay.
Sure.
All right. Well, let's try to pick up where we are off. If you're just tuning in, we're talking about the social landscape. If we're regenerating the social landscape to mitigate, this is a call-in show. Anybody can call in. John, are you open to taking callers? Maybe someone wants to ask you questions about polarization, divisiveness, and conflict. The idea for this show is to use these timeless practices and principles of Qigong and Tai Chi, and utilize them, bring them into the modern world and make them relevant. How are you doing this, John?
That's a great question. I think it's how I live my life moment by moment, with awareness that we are energy, that I am part of a whole, a oneness, and that that my programming has been sort of pushes me in that direction of separateness, and so to forget those sort of deeper truths about life. So I suppose in a simple way, I try to live in my life with an awareness of energy, in terms of just how I'm experiencing life. I also am drawn to the Taoist orientation and Qigong and Tai Chi and the like, because where in the West we seem to have neglected, or took us a long time until our scientists sort of rediscovered the energetic reality of life. These practices, as you say, these ancient practices, always recognized it through their direct encounter with life itself, that we are unbounded energy. And so, again, as I say, as much as possible, I try to to live a life of balance, with awareness of in the external world, certainly of the pull in the direction of, when I'm moving in the yang direction, where I can feel my yang energy sort of building, and the need to in some ways express that. And then how do I find a way of expressing that, but also not being so unbalanced and so polarized that I'm just shouting and I'm basically erupting in a volatile overdrive kind of a state. So I think those challenges, they certainly are alive for me in terms of just my daily life. It's also how I'm aware of what I bring into my body by way of food, in terms of the energetic sort of quality of that. And I think the piece that I would which I've sort of seen, especially through my work as a mediator, as I mentioned at the very beginning, I came from a conflict avoidant family. Our family were not just conflict avoidant, but we would the emotional realm wasn't really honored and wasn't really attended to. And so one of my big challenges in life was engaging in emotionality. And the way I think of emotion is energy in motion. So when something happens at a very sort of basic visceral level, I will notice in my body, either maybe my breath has suddenly shifted, or my muscles are tensing and my body's emoting. And so now I either have a choice of doing what I did as a little kid, which was being taught to suppress that, to hold on, don't let that energy flow. So that's been a big path for me in my life, has been that sort of intersection of how I relate to the physical sensations in my body that are tuning me into what's going on in my environment, and allowing in that sort of harmonious way that energy to flow, and also to get the information that experience is bringing with me. And so that's been huge for me, both at a personal level, but also has translated into the work that I do with folks in conflict, because almost always, there's a cognitive, conceptual, in the mind aspect to the conflict, of like how people conceive of what's going on and what should happen in a mental construct way. But what I've consistently found is that the resolution doesn't lie there. It relies more in the heart of the matter, and in terms of the feeling and helping the energy to move, to allow the person's anger, which has been suppressed and blocked, to move. Because when people are angry, what I when I was growing up, I was really scared of anger. And what I eventually came to discover was that anger tells me, well, one, this person is alive, they're engaged, but they care strongly about something. And what they care about, their strategy to address and to get the result that they want is not working. And so then their body their body brings them energy. In other words, it brings them energy to do something about it. But then they've got the social construct that's telling them, no, you can't express this energy. It's not, appropriate. And they put a lid on it and they try and suppress it and they hold it in their body. But it's not like that energy's gone away. It's still in their body. And so eventually something happens and it erupts. So when we suppress anger, we have to watch out for violence. But in any event, so all of that, I know you started in a more, how do I relate to energy? So it was just to start from there, but really in terms of our conversation today, I'd bring it to where I'm really bringing it is to say one of the most important pieces in terms of that regeneration of the social landscape is understanding and appreciating the value of the emotional realm and helping people to work with that as an expression of energy and to see how we want to allow that to flow and to get the message and to see that there are no really negative or bad emotions. It's all just energy indicating to us how we're experiencing life and where we're, as I said, that, anger tells us the person cares, their strategy isn't working. When we're experiencing sadness, there's a sense of, of loss. There's something that they're either anticipating they're going to lose or they have lost a dear one, someone close to them. So that's a different expression of energy. And again, when sadness gets suppressed, it can, not always, but it can lead to depression. In the same way, when we suppress fear, it often will lead to anxiety. So a lot of the dysfunctional but sort of the unproductive expressions of emotionality that lead it to be labeled as negative actually come from the simple suppression and the not allowing of the energy to flow. And so I just say, it's certainly in my life, that's been a practice. And just partly because of the way that I was programmed and socialized, to firstly open up to my emotional realm, to become familiar with it, to notice how the sequence from in my body experience, the physical emoting in my body, moves from there to me being aware this is something that I'm, like sometimes what we call, I'm having a toward response. I like it. I desire this feeling. Or I'm having an away response, like I'm adverse to this experiencing. But from there, getting to being able to identify what that nuanced feeling is. But even, you see, as we shift from emotion to feeling, we're going in a more cognitive mind direction. And then with that, once we get into I'm feeling shame, or I'm feeling jealousy, or what have you, there's going to be the mind's narrative about why this has happened and what should happen. And that's again where we get in, that's where things start getting dangerous. And that's where we get into, where we see people getting into their conflicts, because you shouldn't have done this. But if we trace it all the way back, we discover at the root of that was something in the person's sensing body where the energy wasn't allowed to flow.
There's so many things to unpack here. Quickly, I wanted to hone in on this idea that the emotion is connected to the inside, and the emotion is what brings you life. So interestingly, as you noted, like an emotion of anger can fill you to act, where otherwise, if you are not filled with an emotion or spirit, you would likely not act. So it makes me think of like very a depressed or rigid state is what Dan Siegel calls it, a rigid state, depressed state. And then so you spoke about how the emotion fills you to, in a way, activate and manifest the body, and how persons can eventually act in a way that is violent. But however, you're able to empathize and see how, wow, this person cares a lot, right? This person cares a lot. It's difficult to see that. Like, Marilyn, she's focused her peace games on schools in response to school shootings. It's easy to see that. It's easy to see where the hurt, the pain, the suffering is to kids and families who've lost life. And it's really difficult to see the suffering in the person who's committed the act of violence, who was filled with that anger, who was filled with that spirit. Is really difficult to empathize. It's not necessarily cultivated in our mindset, in our mindscapes, to empathize, if you will. So I'd like to kind of look at how violence begins. You kind of touched on this in terms of my practice of martial arts. Hands clashing, swords clashing, weapons clashing, unrest in the streets. Like, this is easy to see. You can call it violence. We can also like point to that as the myriad of things. But if we're looking at regeneration, we got to look at like the source. Like, what is the source of violence? And I like to utilize Marshall Rosenberg, who your empathy set kind of comes from as well, feelings and needs. And I really look at how there's a progression of violence in the verbal space, in the thought space, and in the thinking realm, and how our thoughts and our judgments. Marshall Rosenberg really hones in on how judgment is a violent act in the act, in the mental act, in the yin space of judgment. He considers that a violent act where you can be violent to yourself and be violent to others. Can you want to talk about that, or share something, and maybe speak to leadership and the emotional Tai Chi? There's a caller coming in, so I'm going to try to take that caller and see if they want to get on air. Go ahead and call back, caller.
So should I respond first though, Javi?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay. So just in terms of that theme, at least where I'd like to sort of pick off is that piece around violence. So I think one of the key things, which seems sort of, I don't know, in a way obvious, but I think it's always, it bears sort of bringing into people's awareness, is that emotion is not the same as behavior. And so so a lot of the time, the reason why people will associate, say, an emotion like anger as being scary and dangerous is because the behavior that flows from that is scary and dangerous. So like a little child that maybe is struggling to go to sleep at night, and the parent has put it down, and the parent goes and sits down in the lounge and finally picks up its glass of, the glass of wine that it's been waiting for all day to have, and takes a sip, and then has this sort of sense that there's another being in the room, and looks around, and their child is standing in the door and says, "Mommy, I can't sleep." And the parent gets up and takes the baby to the room and puts them to bed again. And this little sequence plays out a number of times. And if you think about that parent, they have valid needs. They just want a little bit of ease. They want a peace and quiet. They've had a long day at work. They've come home. They've cooked a meal. They've taken care of the family. And all they want is just a little bit of quiet time. And their strategy to get the baby to lie down, or the child to lie down and to go to sleep, is not working. And so often it can be difficult for that parent in that moment of anger, frustration as a milder expression of that, say maybe on the fifth time, not to, as they're walking to the room, to grab the little child's arm and squeeze it tightly, and the little child says, "Oh, that hurt," right? And so to my mind, it's in those little interactions where we start experiencing, for example, violence, in other words, a physical expression where we're bringing some pain to bear on another as a way of expressing our own emotional needs. So I think that's the first piece, is just saying that. And then the other thing, which when I'm training folks in conflict resolution, I always point out to them, there's a continuum of behavior that goes into conflict resolution. On the one hand, we have avoidance. We have people that will walk away, and that's, again, it's a strategy, and sometimes it's appropriate to yield, to leave, to allow, not to engage. It's to know when to do that. And then I say, what's on the other far end of the continuum? And most of the time they forget us, and I point it out to them. I say, on the other end is violence. And most of the time, like you're saying, Marshall Rosenberg, as you correctly point out, he's inspired me greatly, and my empathy set of cards are based on his work. He's focusing on judgment as a form of violence, but that's conceptual, verbal, as opposed to physical. But I think it's important that we, sort of see both of those as being, like as in terms of our language today, sort of yang expressions and problematic expressions as ways of harmonizing the energy that is really calling forth to be harmonized. And that what the beauty and the wisdom of Marshall Rosenberg was, he helped us to, it's almost like, there's the five, and you can share, the five elements in terms of sort of Taoist sort of worldview, but in his world, he would say feelings and needs. So with feelings, we're getting to the emotions, that's acknowledging the energy of the experience. And that's, to my mind, is really the source of what's kind of going on. So we always have to, and that, what I'd also say is a key understanding in conflict resolution, or just really in life, is that feelings, emotions are there to be acknowledged, not to be judged, not to be repressed, just to be allowed. And the more we can acknowledge them, the better. In fact, the Gestalt school of therapy, they call it their paradoxical theory of change. They say a person can change when you allow them to be what they are. So if a person's angry and you say to them, don't be angry, that's not going to help. They're going to think, you don't get it. I need to add some volume. I need to add some more examples. I need to demonstrate to you why I'm entitled to be angry. The sooner you can acknowledge and validate and allow, again, connect with, follow, allow that emotion, that's where you're going to find the movement. And then it's also recognizing that in this realm of this 10,000 things, this realm of Earth here, everyone has needs. We have universal needs. As life starts, we take our first breath, and when it ends, we end with an out breath. So we all have needs, and being able to work with those two elements, trying to structure conversation so that we can allow the expression of emotion and discover the validity of the person's needs. To my mind, that is the way in which we avoid the unnecessary expressions of violent behavior, because as Marshall Rosenberg would point out, people, when they are violent, are expressing their valid needs in an unproductive, unfortunate way, but that they have at the heart of it valid concerns, and they also have their true lived human experience that are reflected in their emotions.
Thanks, John. We're going to take a caller, and go ahead and answer the caller's question, and go ahead and use that time for your last words as well as we complete the show. Go ahead, caller.
I just first I'll try to keep this short. Javi and John, thank you for a beautiful conversation. I think you both exhibit, lots of wisdom. I would also ask you to repeat the name of John's book there. And I was just going to express, for myself, I think my first instinct, even as a kid, I think I was similar to you, John, in terms of how you described your family dynamics and perhaps yourself not being in touch with your emotions or being able to express yourself as well as maybe you wanted. I often, my violent tendencies or side will manifest very quickly and easily because I'm not as in touch with my emotional side, even though I definitely have a strong emotional side. What I've found is that I've been thinking about it. It's like when I open myself up to that emotional side, sometimes you end up getting hurt or burned, right? And so I think maybe people learn over time, like, putting up that more violent or aggressive or, the yang side of things protects them, from that pain, perhaps being exposed to it as much. And lastly, I just wanted to say, I wish there was a way to take your your people you draw upon wisdom to apply it on, a global scale and government and social scale. Trying to get through people's difficulties and basically being able to open up and listening and empathizing with other people. But thank you so much for the conversation, and I'll listen off there. Thank you both.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I have to say that I empathize with the idea of not having a clear path or even an acknowledgement of emotional life in growing up, and difficult to navigate emotional life and such, and the energy of emotion as you walk through life. So I've had to also cultivate those skills and have the awareness of that as well. Go ahead and respond, John, and give us your last words and your contact info.
Really appreciated your listener, what he shared. I think we're all on the path together. We're all, as the late Rodney King would say, we're all struggling to get along. In terms of that sort of worldwide dilemma that we still face in 2021, where we're so violent. And I shared this with Javi the other day. It's sad to me that probably today billions will have been spent on how to kill one another and actually killing one another. And a very small amount of money will have been spent on the ways of relating in a peaceful, loving, kind way. And as long as we're pointing in that direction, I'm afraid cause and effect is going to deliver more of that. But it's also always good just to connect with those that care and are seeking to change. And I think the opportunity to your listener is really to say, as we look into the world out there, is to follow Gandhi's line, which is, you be the change that you wish to see in the world. And it's not easy, and it does take effort to reprogram the wiring. But the beautiful thing is that we have that capacity with our brain's plasticity. And I think it is hard when we try a different approach and it, as it were, backfires, or we feel like we get hurt or taken advantage of, and it prompts us or tempts us to go back to our well-worn protective patterns from childhood of saying the way to protect myself is, you hurt me, so I'm going to hurt you back. So it's not easy, and it takes constant vigilance and noticing. But I think my last sort of comment would be to say that allowing yourself to have your feelings, and a lot of that work can be done personally on your own, of just allowing and acknowledging the truth. Don't try and bluff yourself that you're not feeling angry, but try to dissipate that energy on your own before you come to express it. So another way of sometimes putting it is we clean the wound out before we stitch it up. So sometimes we have to do that first. But that's, again, thank you for that call, that caller. I don't think I have too much to say other than thank you, Javi. I really appreciated the conversation, just being able to connect and share these ideas. The tool that I would say, I think your reader asked about my book. The book was really more geared towards human resource managers and helping them to learn how to mediate. And what I'm most excited about, though, right now is my empathy set of cards, because that's the most practical tool for getting people in touch with feelings and needs and giving them positive ways of expressing themselves. And I'll throw in another thing, which I think is such a undervalued tool, which is the talking stick. And that all you need for that is just to pick up a little twig outside or a pen as a way of bringing structural balance to your conversations. So thank you, Javi. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate this.
Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate that. And I really actually feel called and inspired to expand on this. And I actually have a few more, interestingly, martial artists and Tai Chi and Qigong practitioners lined up, hopefully, to expand on this idea. A friend of mine noted the martial arts for peace hashtag. So hopefully we can use this as a stepping point to continue on the path of learning, as you noted. So that's a concept that I've had to contend with in terms of our perceived successes and failures. It's the idea that we're all learning. I want to thank you for coming in today and speaking with us. This has been Chi Talks. I'm Javi. It's 9:59. You got it tuned to KMUD Garberville, 91.1 FM and HD1, KMUE Eureka, 88.1 FM and HD1, KLAI Laytonville, 90.3 FM, on the web at kmud.org, and at FM Translator K25 8BQ Shelter Cove 99.5.